Okay, now hopefully my screen won't freeze, and let's share. We're good. We're good. We're good. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Your microphone's super echoey.
All right. Are we still echoing?
Just a little bit. It's better though.
Okay. I am not sure what's going on. You know what? I can't do this though. Okay. All right. I think that may have fixed the issue. I'm hoping. Okay. So let's get into this. All right. Thanks, Bon. Okay. So, if we take this topic from a philosophical perspective, just really quick before we get into this, it has been argued, going clear back in Western culture and to the Greeks and even before then, about what is more accurate. One person would say nothing has existed in the mind unless it's been sensed. Okay, meaning that nothing exists until you actually have sensed that physical world. Okay, and then if we kind of fast forward to another Cartesian or rules, it's that the idea I think, therefore I am idea. So this idea of what's more important, sensations, the external world, or what we perceive that external world to be. Okay, and if you want to think about this at this bottom here, it says philosophical roots. If a tree falls in the woods and no one is around, does it exist? Did it really happen? And in a way, it's kind of a valid question, because if there's nothing there to sense it, did it make any sound? And that's kind of one of those thought processes that, of course, in our mind, we can imagine a tree halfway around the world falling, and we can imagine hearing it. But did that really happen? Did it really exist without something being there to sense its occurrence? Okay. Um, in modern times, we tend to think of sensations and perceptions in two separate categories because we have learned that what we perceive is not always what we sense. Okay, so we're going for our discussions on this kind of introduction on sensation and perceptions to kind of set us up for the cultural conversation then this next Tuesday is sensations are the process of receiving physical information from the physical world. Okay. Perceptions is the process of organizing and interpreting those sensations. Okay. And this happens on a biological level through what's called transduction. And transduction is related to sensations, and it's where physical energy is then converted into electrical chemical information that the brain then can process. So it's taking, for example, light waves, and those light waves hitting the retina in the back of the eye with rods and cones, and those rods and cones transform those physical light waves into electrical chemical information that our brain then can use. Okay. Now, if this was Psych 101, we'd be saying, so why do we have to separate things like sensations and perceptions? And it's because we know that we don't have a one-to-one association between a sensation and what we see. And we can look at this from the vision system. Okay. If uh, physical light energy was an exact replication of what's hitting the back of our eye, one, we have the vision acuity of driving down the road in a heavy rain without windshield wipers. That's the clarity of the image that is being projected on the back of your eye. Also, if it was a one-to-one association, it would be upside down. Okay. The other aspect of it in kind of these terms is that we all would have a blind spot. Okay, because going the nerves going into the back of the eye to be sent to the brain, there are no receptors there. So we have no receptors in the center of our vision. And technically, we have blind spots that our brain fills in. Okay. So from a very introduction to psychology level, we say that there's difference between sensations and perceptions because what we receive is after it's been processed by the brain. Our brain cleans it up, it puts it into high definition, it fills in blind spots, and all of those things to make it so that we see what our brain expects to see. Okay. And so long that it can get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to skip this one because the one thing that we will be talking a lot about this coming Tuesday is these top bottom up and what are called bottom up versus top down processes. Okay. Top-down processes are when we use our knowledge, our memory, our to tell the sensation system, what we should be experiencing. Okay. Sensations, and so to kind of differentiate between these two, perceptions is when you go to a swimming pool and you expect it to be really cold, okay? And so you go into the pool and it's freezing, okay? Because of your expectation of that being that way, okay? Sensations, you're down. And simply, if your hand on a stove, your son should just lift your hand or not, and you feel like this is what we're experiencing because of the process we. But again, into these processes, we're going to see cultural influence. Okay, we'll look at postural comparisons this coming day to really see how people again need the same stimuli, the same um, light waves, the same waves, the same, everything. But if they're from two different cultures, they may have two completely different experiences. Okay. And then this is just another one of the basic Psych 101 thing to recognize it as a stimulus. And you may have all heard the term subliminal messages. Really popular in the 60s, 70s, certain records you could play him backwards and it'd be saying Johnny is a devil or something like that. Um, but it became really popular in the later 70s and 80s when I can't think all this with things like grocery stores and stuff, wondering if they can use subliminal stimulation in order to get people to purchase more items. Wondering if okay. And so original just below the being able to perceive something, it would say stuff like the purchasing of Coca-Cola and Dorito chips. And what we have found is no, it doesn't. Direct subliminal messages to your what you would call your rational area of your brain, that frontal cortex, does not work. But the emotional areas of the brain. Okay. So for example, if let's say let's say we play some really good happy music, don't worry, be happy, or something, your mood, and you're in a good mood, okay, and then you come across a Coca-Cola display that says happy, good feeling people drink more Coca-Cola, okay, does that increase the sale of Coca-Cola in that instance? The answer is yes. Indeed, we do buy more when our emotional state is congruent with what we're purchasing. Um, and so from that subliminal we can influence their buying behavior. And that's why, for example, if you go to start playing what Walmart wants them to play, okay? Walmart's main people that they want to influence are individuals from the age of 40 up. So the music that, if you ever recognize, is music from that age groups kind of have a really connection with music. If you ever heard of like Hot Tub for about 16 to 23-year-olds, because that's their market. Okay. If you ever wonder if it's true, if you're listening to their music, put on one of the most boring lectures you've ever heard or something, notice over time that you're the. So this is another way, though, that we're aware of it occurring. Okay. Another thing that we're influenced, and this will be a major thing when we get into culture, is what's called a priming effect that occurred earlier in the day or the week that then now, okay? In this little picture here is an example of research I did when I was an undergraduate like you guys, um, is what we did in this research. The person that I was participants come into the lab and we had them do a first part. So we wanted this component that I'm going to get into unrelated to an experience, told them that reading increases a person's physical ability. So we were going to have them read an article and then walk around a track or run around a track, and we're recording their time. That part's complete nonsense. We really didn't even write anything down. But we did manipulate. One group read a story about inner city life. Okay. Another other group randomly read stories about the great outdoors. Okay. And then they went and did that physical activity, blah, blah, blah. About 40 minutes later, they were coming back in, and we said, hey, we have this quiz involved in, we can get you more credit. You can take it back to your teacher and say, yes, I did 2 experiments. It only will take 5. In the real actual part of the experiment is we showed this picture for less than 2 seconds. Okay. And then we just simply asked them to write down everything that they saw. Okay. And if an hour and a half, this is the interesting part, if an hour and a half before doing this, this guy is white, but for some reason he's holding this cup that now became a pistol. This dog was never recognized, and the fire became one of those fire barrels that you see on TV in inner city that everyone's huddled around. So it was actually a barrel with fire coming out of it. Everyone was wearing hoodies and whatnot. The people who read about being in the great outdoors, they identified this as what it looks like, a campfire. They recognized the dog. They recognized that this guy was carrying a cup, and everybody was kind of dressed for the great outdoors with the hats and everything else. So they were kind of a little bit more accurate about what they saw in this picture. Okay. This is an example of priming effect. Okay. Where earlier experiences, perceptions are current, because what was happening is even though they were unrelated, that experience an hour or so earlier about the 2 different stories unconsciously said, well, based on what we've been doing, this, okay. And so again, when we come to culture and what body image, okay, seeing 2 individuals, and we may perceive them differently than the person sitting next to it. Individuals versus Paris, New York Pacific, and this is a big generalization, so please keep this in mind. It's just and they would see complete beauty. Bikini model in unattractive, and vice versa. Okay, being affected by culture, though, that we'll get into image, establish what we attractiveness determines a lot of cultural aspects about how we'll get more into this and how culture primes us to perceive things as our reality from a different culture. Okay. Of psychophysics, excuse me. And this is actually getting more culturally, all of these things where the absolute threshold is the minimum amount of stimuli is we look at something called Weber's law. Weight in your hand, how much more weight do you have to add in order to make it so you feel a difference in that weight? That's kind of the absolute between you and being able to perceive something or separate thresholds. So discriminate. What does it to at least detect it about 50? Think across our aim in all of these. This is kind of shaking perceived stimuli. Because we're actually going to see some cultural differences logically based. As I mentioned, is a difference in 2 stimuli. There must be a D if I have. Weber's law states that in order to count of weight you add, it's the percent illustration. Let's say it's 5% change in weight in order we weigh 100 pounds. Weight, any weight gain, okay? But let's say we weigh 300 pounds. 5% would be 15 pounds. And so for someone who weighs 300 pounds, they would have to gain 15 pounds in order to fight. The heavier we get, it's also harder to realize that we're gaining a lot. Okay. So this was fixed across these percentages vary each day. Because it's another good example of the interplay and perceptions. And what I want you to really pay attention. Actually, let me do this real quick. Okay. What's called an invert, where they're going to be in images, and I want you to take a look. Sorry about that.
Now then, Susanna, if I could have a look at the...
Our brains correct for this inversion. Now hers will be forced to make yet a... At home, an hour later, the world is still bewildering. On the third day, Susanna tries to write her name.
What's that? Oh no, it's getting worse.
Books. She's able to invert the letters completely.
It's quite easy. Right. Ah! Oh, goodness. Ah! Amazing.
And now, Susanna Fine's brain has managed yet another inversion of the...
Everything seems completely normal again.
This basic pathway of vision is therefore flexible, plastic. It's ready to help us adapt to a world that changes.
All right. So we've talked about subliminal messaging and we've talked about basic information in a very basic way. This video I like to show for this class adaptability to changes in stimuli and whatnot. And this is probably one of the reasons that the humans are one of the very single species that has been on the earth. So this is just a good example of how quickly we have the ability to adapt to changes in perception and sensations. Okay. In wholes. Okay. And this comes from a German word called Gestalt. And Gestalt psychology is this idea that we don't see things for their parts. We see things of vase, or we see two people looking at each other, but we don't see both at the same time most of the time. Okay. If we look at this one, this is my Psych 101 that I need to change. I think Luke's in that class if he's in this picture. And it plays a role, or our experience plays a role. Some people will see the young lady. I don't know what you are all seeing, but again, this is an example of priming to experience. If I were to ask you this again and sit back and ask everybody, for example, who you've interacted with, mostly young people, you're more likely to just see the young lady. If you've interacted with older people, you probably a bit with both. You kind of can see both if you adjust your perception a little. Okay, but this is another example of how we see things based upon our experience. Again, this class being on culture, we'll see how culture plays a role in what we see. Okay. The rules of closure. So again, you see the actual right answer is there's none. There's a bunch of right angles, but that's it. Okay. It is our perceptual system that makes us see really see it a little bit brighter than the outside color. Okay. You probably can see or feel that you can see the lines closing on these triangles when there's really not. Okay, this is the law of closure, that we like to make sense of things based on what we feel we should be perceiving. Okay, and then to group these triangles together versus the solid triangles we group all of these together, we tend to see two continuity. We see this line going right here when in reality there probably is no line. Okay, symmetry, our brain is wired to love symmetry and whatnot. And then periodicity, we tend to see images where there is no real image, so we can even though these are all really technically just random images, our brain sets them up to where we see something that we feel we should be seeing. Into all of this stuff with this class, but I do want to go illusions. We tend to see line A as being longer than line B, even though technically they're actually the same, used in clothing in order to make someone either feel wider or shorter. If I want to make someone look thinner in a shirt, I'll do what's called inward stitching. We want someone to feel bigger in a shirt or in a pants. We do what's called outward stitching, which is, okay. And again, it's all perceptual. If we look at just a vertical and horizontal line are actually the same exact length, but we perceive this line, the horizontal line, as longer than the vertical line, mainly because what we're trying to do is create depth in the same. All right. And again, the same length, but perceptually, this one is shorter than this one. And it has to do with the number of lines this one is crossing versus the number of lines this one is crossing. And again, in Psych 101, I actually have people try to draw this. Some of them get it. If you want to look this up and try and draw it, it's kind of a fun thing to do. But in order to actually draw those parts and then go to the next, but this is called the devil's fork. And how many forks are there? Are there two? Or a perceptual issue? All right. All right. Now, to emphasize these perceptual issues, very interesting perceptual thing, if you want to think about it, is when does the sun and the moon look its biggest? Um, Usually it's at sunset or at sunrise when it's as bigger. Okay. But if our sensations were an exact replication of our perceptions, technically, when the sunrise, it's further away from you than when it's directly up. So if our sensations matched our perceptions of us and smaller when it's at the sunset or sunrise, because that's when it's further away. Expectations. Our brains have expectations about what we should be seeing. When we see something at a horizon, we use, okay. And the best example is if anyone has seen that beautiful of it, and you're like, why is the picture not as good as what I'm experiencing? Okay. The reason actual picture of what's actually happening. What you are seeing is your perceptions of what you expect to be seeing. And that's why cameras equal don't always match with what